Anyway, but tonight we're delighted to have three wonderful local poets. James Morehead, with portraits of red and gray, and did you also bring canvas?
I did.
You did. Excellent.
Canvas, yeah. And
our old friend Kate Moore, I still think of her as Kathy, with her new book, Alpha Poetica, a poetry primer for everyday poet. And Ivan Hobson, and I still think of him as Josh. It's hard when you know people so long, with his first book, Cutting Teeth. Ivan laid the floor at our location by Lunardi's back in 1999.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, we were all younger then. Anyway, but it is a delight to have all three of them here this evening. They're going to share the stage, share poems, take questions, and sign books. So we do have copies of all three books at the counter. So thank you for being here.
So we're going to do the format's going to be a little different than your normal wall of poetry. So we're going to do 2 rounds of 5 minutes each, and in between we'll chat a little bit about our impressions. So it'll be a combination of poetry reading and discussion among poets and any questions, but probably mostly about us, and at the end take more questions. So we didn't really talk about the order before, and Ivan volunteered to go first, which no one likes to do, so thank you.
I'm going to take this off. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
I guess the first thing that was really neat for me is our great uncle is an artist named Earl Thallander, and he wrote he did about 70 or 80 books. He did the Back Roads of California, and he's a really pretty well-known Napa artist. So the family let me use any of the artwork that I wanted to use, so it was really cool. I am a native of the Bay Area, and my family's been here for about 5 generations, and my dad was a machinist, and my grandfather worked for Shell, and my mom worked in academia, so I somehow bifurcated all of that and teach at the college and also work at a shipyard at the same time. So yeah, this is called The Desperate, and they dedicated it to Alfred Zampa, who was one of the original bridge builders, and he helped build the Golden Gate Bridge and the Bay Bridge. And we have a bridge, I think, that memorializes it. Hundreds of feet below the girders of the Golden Gate Bridge, dozens of men wait for work. They cook beans over open fires, play cards, and talk about the towns they came from. Each man waiting for a chance at a job. Waiting all day for a bridge worker to quit, get fired, or fall. And read my wife's favorite poem. It's called Cutting His Teeth. My son has become old enough to deny the ballerina that balances herself inside his body. He has taken off his tiara, stepped out of the cavern of his mother's shoes, his world now as blue as the cobalt stacked in the scrapyard. I am worried that he will pick up a steel bar, that his hands will come away red and wet, that we will never see her again, that he will become like other men in this town, dusted with the expectations of the mill, huddled in the corner of the bar, swollen with whiskey, afraid to dance. And, it's called Our Neighbor, and a really neat thing happened where Ted Kooser, he had been our Poet Laureate, he found it in a publication, and he turned it into, they have a weekly column called American Life and Poetry. So I did that, and then I got to see my kids doing reports on the poems. And one of them was a Russian, and it was talking about war with the United States and Russia, and I'm thinking to myself, oh wow, you really missed the point. And it kind of scared me a little bit, because I'm like, wait, I'm not Russian, I'm Scottish, we just spelled. Ivan somehow became Ivan, I don't know. It's called Our Neighbor. Every family that lived in our court had an American truck with a Union sticker on the back. And as a kid, I admired them, the way that I thought our soldiers must have admired Patton and Sherman tanks. You once told me that the Russians couldn't take us, not with towns like ours, full of iron, full of workers tempered by the fires of foundries and mills. It wasn't the Russians that came. It was the contract, the strike, the rounds of layoffs that blistered until your number was called. I still remember you loading up to leave for the last time. The Union sticker scraped off with the putty knife. The end of the white tarp draped over your flat truck bed, flapping as you drove away. From your bedroom window, it's kind of a peek into how it feels growing up in a rural environment, like probably a lot of us do. When the midnights become hot enough to inhale the smell of the tobacco fields, people would drag race down your street. Double shadows of horsepower rattling your bedroom window. We used to wait for it, for those few seconds when we could peek through curtains and feel like stars were blazing their paths. A child's wish on a rural street to see winning and losing, what Detroit was building, these outskirts as the center of something. I have one more thing. I timed it. I tried to time it.
It's not that, there's no exit music or anything.
No. But that. In the high country on horseback, we saw that rattlesnake get taken into the sky. What was wrong with the hawk? That it did not finish the job. The snake striking until it was freed, falling until it crashed on the rocks below. And the hawk, drunk with venom, fluttered to the ground where you told me it wouldn't survive the afternoon. There I was, an unsure boy, when I cleared my throat and asked you if you still loved Mom.
So listening to those poems, you create such rich characters, and I could hear it in your voice, especially the third and the last poem. It's almost like a character has inhabited you. So how do you think about the characters you're creating when you're writing your poetry?
I don't know. I just kind of imagine kind of where I'm at, I guess. Oh, it's not a great answer. It's a terrible answer.
I mean, maybe the audience heard it too. It's almost like it wasn't you anymore. It was a characterization of you.
Yeah, I usually end up starting with me or something that I know, and then just let the exploration go wherever it goes, and then I try not to stop it or mess with it too much. Yeah. All right.
Well, Ivan, I think your poems are so beautiful, and you paint such beautiful pictures, but I think you could hear it in the audience here when you read the second poem about the ballerina boy. Like, that just strikes such a nerve. I had chills up and down my body. I just wonder, do you feel that same emotion every time you read it?
I really like that poem,
Yeah.
and that's one of those weird ones that it maybe only took 20 minutes to write, and sometimes they take 10 years. So, and that just kind of flowed out of me, and it was kind of a response to, yeah, it still gets me, because I really kind of hate the kind of homophobic environment that a lot of us kind of grew up in, and you know, so yeah, I think it still means something to me.
Yes, sure.
So Ivan, I'm curious, a couple of your poems started with really crisp images, or You Take Us to the Golden Gate, or the Union Bumper sticker. Were those the points of departure for you when you were composing the poems? Like, did you see that and think that's a poem, or did that come after the poem was already going?
The bridge one came in the beginning. That one, I had actually worked on sharpening tooling for the new Bay Bridge, and so that the imagery came first. But the other one, it was probably 2 stanzas longer, and so it just, that came from cutting, figuring out a good place to end somewhere.
Because you're landing these poems and you're hearing us go, oh,
Yeah.
and you're bringing us, we're not crashing anything for sure.
Okay. So first I do want to show the covers of my books because they're real important to me. My friend Maren Smith is in the audience, and this is my first chapbook, Avians of Morning, and that is her photograph on the cover of this. So I just love that. And then my daughter, Kaylin, is also in the audience, and this is her on the cover of Alpha Poetica. So anyway, I think I want to start with these poems. About 5 years ago, I did a poetry challenge where for 1 month during National Poetry Month, we had to write a poem that just focused on one image, the same image every day for a month. And so I chose birds. I've always had a thing for birds, and I think it's because my dad has always had a thing for birds. When I was little, he used to take me out and show me different birds, and his nickname was Birdman Mac. And so at the end of the month, when I went to read over my poems, I realized they weren't about birds. They were all about my dad. And I'm going to read you just a handful of those poems. Tossed from the nest. The first time I rescued a bird, I was 8 years old, playing tag in Joey Hughes's yard. I stopped when he yelled freeze, looked down at my feet, and there beside my scuffed keds, a nearly naked bird. Everything froze in that moment while I gathered shoebox, tissue pillow, eyedropper, me. In my mind, the bird took rest and sustenance, grew feathers, learned to fly, brought its chicks to meet me, the girl who saved a life. Instead, despite my nursing and desperate prayers, a different fate, life lesson learned. My father's steady hand, my shaking shoulders, his words resounding, nothing you could have done, happens every day. Other mouths to feed. Only the strong survive. And this is A Little Bird Told Me. When I was 16, my boyfriend bought me a parrot and a cage to keep him in. I wanted a lovebird. Played a record day and night, teaching that caged bird to talk. Hello, baby, wanna kiss? Hello, baby, wanna kiss? The bird just squawked, pulled his feathers out one by one, refused to speak, barked like a dog. Still, I didn't understand the misery of not being allowed to fly. This is grief. But now my father had died. Hold tight. Hold tight. The words on the page stung. Something far away, something too familiar. Suddenly, this memoir in my hands, love and bereavement tangled, laid open, raw and bare. A late-night phone call. My father had died. Right then. A moment earlier, he was himself, old and tired, but alive in the world. And then he was not. Hold tight. I closed the book, stared into the yellow eyes of the hawk before me. A couple more. This is Ghost. I found a photograph in a drawer. The three of us captured, bound by time in living color. My father leaning forward, strapped into a wheelchair, his eyes already dead, the rest soon to follow. Captured in that in-between stage where he'd been wheeled along a linoleum hallway by aides who speak in accents dripping of faraway places, whispering, "This is just like home. This narrow bed, this cramped shared space that's always dark." Home, he had a garden and an easy chair where he'd read in afternoon sun, whistle as he filled bird feeders, sing a young man's songs as spring plants took root days and days and days before. The photograph is a lie. There are 3 of us pictured here, but one of us is already a ghost. And these are the last 2 very short ones. Benediction. I learned to love the life-giving energy of earth from him. Sunburned Sundays spent on our knees in the garden, digging bare-handed, gentling the roots into safe spaces, patting dirt into tender brown mounds, sprinkling water as benediction, wiping rivulets of sweat from brows, broken nails on soil-crusted hands. We breathe in the moment, silent, reverent as we listen to a choir of songbirds and the distant preaching of a crow. And finally, messenger. I found a feather stuck in the ground like a flag, a gift from an owl who called out my name, message dropped from the sky god, illegal to own. I carried it home to remind me each new day, rules are for breaking, though spirits are not.
So in this exercise of writing, it was every day for 30 days?
Yeah.
How many poems did you walk away with and went, these are good? And how many do you go, well, I got that day checked off. Well, this one didn't quite work out.
Probably about 25% I was really happy with, and then the rest of them I'm like, no. But I did it, you know.
Did you find that in that process of writing every single day, because I did that same exercise over a holiday a couple of years ago, that once I got into the habit of writing every single day, I would go to sleep thinking, I have no idea what I'm going to write about.
Yep.
Pressure, but then somehow I wake up and have a starting point.
Yeah, that always happens, doesn't it?
That's pretty magical.
Yeah.
Just thinking about when you're writing into a theme, kind of how does it change your imagination or your creativity as opposed to if you're just writing kind of eclectically or individually?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think part of it has to do with the fact that I chose a topic that I really care a lot about, so it was easy. I think if I had chosen something else that was more unfamiliar, it would have been a much more difficult process, but this just seemed that they flowed every day.
That poem actually really touched my heart because our cat had met with a coyote a couple of years ago. I would have kept looking for him up in the hills, and we have turkeys, and every day I would bring back a turkey feather and I would plant it like a little flag in this pot that was in front of our house. So when I kind of read that first poem and then hearing it emotionally kind of got me.
Yes.
I was going to say that through your poems you paint such vivid pictures of your own emotions. When you were looking at the image each day, would you fixate on that emotion and create the poem, or would the emotion stem from the words that you were putting onto the page?
Oh, what a question. I did not focus on emotion at all. I was just writing the poem. And the emotion, I guess, just became attached.
Yeah, I was wondering, so you imposed 2 constraints on yourself in the month and about birds. And you know how we are when we think, don't think about the elephant in the room. Did other ideas for poems keep trying to intrude, and you're going, no, it has to be about a bird? Or how did that, and when the month was over, did you go, okay, I'm coming?
Well, I still write a lot of bird poems. So, no, because I would write other poems during the day, but I just made sure I got that bird poem done. And I think there's something magical about constraint. Like the more parameters you put on your work, I think it frees the creativity in some ways.
Yeah, I had a chance to interview A. Stallings for a poetry podcast that I do. She's wonderful at received forms, very, very structured poetry, but she does it in a way that you have to read it twice to figure out what the form is, because she's so good at it. But I was asking her, I said, do you figure out what the form is after you write the poem? And she says, oh, no. She does the form up front because it removes a decision. And she just writes the poem to the form and uses it at a constraint, kind of like musicians do. Music is written to many constraints, really.
Sure.
All right, I guess that leaves me.
All right, so I'm going to read two poems that are pretty new. I had the wonderful opportunity to premiere it on the SF Chronicle's Total SF podcast, which is a celebration of San Francisco, and it's unabashedly pro San Francisco. It's a wonderful podcast. So these two poems were premiered in the podcast at an event, and I should introduce myself, James Morehead, Poet Laureate of Dublin, California, not Ireland. I was at a reading once where someone was a little disappointed I wasn't from Dublin, Ireland. But she is San Francisco in shades of pink and blue, a painted lady with combat boots and attitude. She wears sweatshirts in summer, chilled by salt-soaked fog spilling over evening tides. You might catch a glimpse of her rollerblading across the Golden Gate as you sail beneath suspended steel into Pacific swells. She is portraits in De Young, a cable car's clang, a skate punk sprayed in neon green who runs from bay to breakers or swirls around a rainbow flag on Market Street in June. She is San Francisco, spun with threads of sunset hues and wisps of endless dune. Needless to say, I was in San Francisco for a Billy Collins reading, and I felt the city was coming to life a few months ago, and was waiting in the audience and started writing that, and was just very excited about San Francisco coming back after a very, very, very challenging couple of years. 9.5 miles per hour after the San Francisco Cable Car Museum. Caution, cable car crossing, stenciled yellow on asphalt outside a cavernous brick powerhouse. It all starts and ends here. 4 continuous loops, wire ropes stretched tight by tension shivs turned precisely 9.5 miles per hour by winding machinery. Motors and gears, massive and dripping with grease, until night falls and cars sleep, when workers wake to splice worn cables in time for the morning rush. Gold Rush inventor Andrew Halliday dreamt of designs for carrying ore from mines to mills, and corseted ladies, men in top hats, children sporting their Sunday best up the steep, sandy slopes of San Francisco. He wrote of the great cruelty and hardship, of horses pulling streetcars up rain-slicked cobblestones, until one slipped, brakes failed, dragging the terrified standardbred down, leaving it mutilated between truck and rail. Halliday's cables fanned out, rattling in trenches past Union Square to Fisherman's Wharf, from Van Ness to Embarcadero. A century later, I wait at the base of Powell, listening to buskers drum on trash cans as 2 operators shove number 16 on a turnaround. I cling to a handrail right up front, feet balanced on a wooden running board, jostling with tourists smiling for selfies. With two distinct clangs on the cable car bell, our driver pulls hard on the long iron grip so its jaw can clench cable as ratchet teeth chatter. Through an intersection we go, 9.5 miles an hour, chilled by wisps of fog, up and over Knob Hill. So that poem's going to be part of the book that I'm working on, an ekphrastic tour of San Francisco Bay Area museums. And my wife is, who's sitting in the back, is joining me in visiting every single museum in the San Francisco Bay Area, capturing hundreds of photos, and then writing a poem or two about each single one. So I've got about 8 written and about 50 to go. All right, so I've got one more that I'm going to read from my second book, Portraits of Red and Gray. The cover poem is half of the book, and it's about my trip to the Soviet Union in 1983 when I was a teenager, spent 18 days there. The cover designer found a lithograph by a Russian artist from 1983 that's perfect. So it's a book of memoir poems. I'm not going to read half of my book. Instead, I will read a poem that captures the spirit of my younger daughter. Ode to Docks. Stiff leather, steel-toed, air-cushioned, yellow-stitched. I took my docks everywhere, to the Diamond Club on Sherburne, to Maple Leaf Gardens for Purple Rain, to the Silver Crown every Saturday night. It was 1988, my hair crimped, jet black, sprayed stiff like Robert Smith, a reference photo by my mirror. I stood for hours in those docks waiting for Love and Rockets to take the stage, or Thomas Dolby, or Depeche Mode, or others I've long forgotten. I was tall and slender and safe in those docks that signaled alternative. When winter came, they gripped the ice, and in the rain they kept me dry. As I grow older, they do too, showing the scuffs of passing time and one more crease with each step. When I pass a window display and see docks all shiny and new, I'll pause, look down, and keep walking. And when I step into the Fillmore, you join me, all grown up and beaming with the joy of a Christmas morning, our docks side by side as the band takes the stage. For Evelyn.
We are both hopelessly addicted to live music. I think we're in a contest to see who can go to the most concerts.
Gosh, well, your poems are so rich in detail. That's what I can't get over listening to you read. Like, you have just so many references in there, and I'm wondering, as you're composing a poem, like, are you making a list of all the things that you want in there, or are they just coming as you write down one, another one comes? How do you do that?
I definitely heard that enough times that I have to believe that I have a knack for strong, vivid imagery. I've had people at readings say they kept their eyes closed because it was like watching a movie, which is pretty wild. I think it's just something I'm drawn towards, and I'm a visual person, so when I'm writing, for example, the streetcar poem, we went to the streetcar museum, and then I went into the city and specifically wrote a streetcar and recorded it to get the sounds and paid close attention. I do think writing poetry, poems are usually a reference to something.
Yeah.
Occasionally they're completely pulled out of thin air, but usually they're a reference to something, and I definitely think really hard about what's the word that captures exactly that image that's in my mind, and that's where I'll spend a lot of time, is really looking for that perfect word that's interesting and poetic and captures, and then research too. I had to do research on Andrew Halliday that I knew nothing about.
So I'll go to the ear portion. There's such a wonderful, like, sonic quality in your pieces, so I'm kind of wondering, when you're working it out, do you work it out silently, or do you end up finding yourself saying the poems out loud kind of as you work through them to pick up on that sonic quality? So maybe talk about the experience of how you get to that kind of sonic
So that's a great question, because I've written poetry since I was in 10th grade, so 40 plus years. But only until recently, when I came out as a poet and stopped being shy about it, because I was very self-conscious about it. And then it was the pandemic which pushed me out of that. I thought I was being very, I don't know, it just felt weird. Then I leaned into it. So one of the things I realized when I'm actually going to have a book published is I've got to learn how to recite my poetry. So I hired a poetry coach. He's a friend of my older daughter's. They went to high school together. He's a USC theater grad. And he's also does poetry competitions. So he taught me how to recite poetry, and I've been working at it. And I also learned that by reciting my poetry out loud, which I'd never done really before then, is extremely helpful. It's extremely important, and I will inflict my friends and family with poetry readings, whether they like it or not, because it's just, I read them all out. Where they start is typically late at night on my phone, Google Docs, dark mode, so I don't wake up my wife. And then I just don't worry about the structure of it. I just get images down, and then I get all this raw material, and then I start figuring out what the form should be, and craft it into a poem the next, over a period of time. But part of that is absolutely reading it out loud. Now that's good. My poetry is much better since I started incorporating that. So it's critical to write good poetry is to read it out loud. Absolutely. Great question.
At least need the glasses to find my place. And then until I was 40, I did not need glasses. And now it's like every year, every year or two, they got to go a little stronger.
Soon you'll be having cataracts.
So it's called After 99 Years. Caterpillar Tractor's original home was in San Leandro, and they shut it in 1985, and it was there for 99 years, and they moved back to Peoria, and my dad had worked there, so after 99 years. There was no strike at the tractor plant, just a deadline when the workers, who once claimed to have yellow paint in their veins, had to be gone for good. Dad made it out okay, buying machines at auction, moving into his grandfather's workshop, heading out into business alone. But what did I know of this city, struggling to find itself, with industry built over farms, with its mighty caterpillar slinking away? Oh, there's a cool picture. Uncle Earl had gone to, I think, Gorky Park in Russia. He used to take people on tours all around the world. And they would.
Is the park that got shut down?
I don't know. I don't know that much about it. But as Caterpillar left, I also, people leave when they get a little older. It's called leaving. I drive east past midnight, Ferris wheel lights, boutiques and restaurants built where industry once exhaled, past where I was born, the bowling alley where my dad first noticed my mother's eyes. From the highway ridge, it all looked like fireflies scattered in summer. By 3, I was where I had never been. Wheat fields near pump jacks drawing oil, the long stretch of power lines humming, a convoy of diesels rumbling, single file with hood emblems, bright as angels against the night. Staying with her. Because of course a lot of times when we leave we're going to be with somebody. Did I really pick that poem? No, I didn't. I think it's called Out the Light. When the steel bar is turning and the carbide insert is cutting what I have asked it to cut, the metal shavings can spin off fine as piano wire. Will you play for me tonight? Something gentle as a butterfly, your eyes on our wedding. Help me forget these machines, all painted gray, with their different ways of friction and voices, like factory workers at a bar near closing time. Play for me tonight, my love. Remind me that I am delicate, something silk underneath it all. I had been machining one evening and I had a bee fly into like a big bumblebee, and I saved him out of the chip pile. And the next morning when I got back to work, there was a bee, and he came and he actually circled around me and landed on me. And so it's called bumblebee. You didn't fly into this machine shop and anoint my lips like Plato or Pindar. Instead, you circled the turret lathe and landed on my chin. It is foolish to think that you are the one that I saved from the chip pile last night. But I am foolish. And why else would you have come here, sure as a thankful friend? It is right for me to trust you, to believe that we are both just workers, curious about each other. There is steel and flowers waiting in the pause we take. There is your ancient song as you flit away to the fields at dawn. And then this is my last one. Because the machine shop has been in the family for so long, I actually kind of got to know, like my grandpa and great-grandpa threw it just almost through their stuff. So this is where I come to meet you. In the ancestral weight of tool handles, in the steel dials polished down by decades against your palms, in the anvil you brought from Texas after the family farm went dry. This is where I can feel you around me, after the windows have become glazed with darkness, after the iron in the air has grown thick on my tongue and I am working alone. There are times I stand the way you must have stood, swaying tired on the balls of my feet, biting metal with stronger metal. Times when I hunch the way you must have hunched, grinding tools between centers while the spirit rides the sparks. This is where I leave the photographs, where I walk where you walked before I was born. This is how I've come to know you, the grandfather I was named after, the son my great-grandmother misses each night. This is where I trust you, where I unwrap my whispers, the fragile wings I keep hidden from the world. This is where I confess when I don't know how to mend delicate things.
Ivan, I have to say, I was so hoping you were going to read that last poem because I've read it over dozens of times, and it's one of my favorite poems. I just love it. And one of the things you do so beautifully is there's a contrast in all your poems between the very mechanical and then the very ethereal. And they're just so beautiful, the way that you weave that together. Do you start with the concrete, the mechanical, and then the other just comes?
Somehow I feel like I'm a duality.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I feel like I was kind of raised to be a man, but I always felt kind of sensitive. And so I think once I got into college, I started to really learn how to appreciate kind of that Jungian, like the anime and animus, like the both, the duality. So I think I try to honor both of those sides. And I don't necessarily think one starts before the other. I'm aware that both exist within me and probably all of us, right? And so I try to find ways to put them in there. But that's really interesting. It's a very conscious decision that I try to make.
So in the Bumblebee poem, which with just the story that you told was fascinating, and yet, which I think is very important in poetry, is that you took that wonderful story and you opened it up to something more like poems should end as an opening to figuring, thinking more, and that you did that really effectively. So I'm curious the editing that went through. Did you have that idea for a poem at the moment where you saw the bumblebee the next day, and then figured out where it would go?
Yeah, a lot of times I will just, it hit me. When I saved him, I think I made a little note, especially when it came, like another bee came back. I went, okay, there's a poem there. There's a lot of chicken scratch. And then, and then it was just trying to kind of get the story right. And then I did research, and I was like, oh wait, like Plato was supposed to have been anointed by a bee, and so that kind of intrigued me even further. I don't know if I answered that question.
Well, actually, you opened up another question, because this is a thing I was thinking about with your first, especially your first selections of poems, the research element. There's the personal experiences you've had, but how do you use research like you did in that poem to kind of expand what you're writing about?
I end up using a lot just to get the kind of factual stuff, and then a lot of testimonial evidence in the form of my dad and all these like 90-year-olds who would come into his little machine shop, and then they would be talking, and I'm just sitting there bored, but it slowly starts working its way in. So, and then I would start researching stuff that they were talking about.
I think that's something people don't realize, how much research goes into a lot of poetry, and now I'm always on the lookout for poetic words in the research.
You don't want to. I don't want to get something factually wrong.
All right. So when I was growing, before I start that, I just want to say that James and Ivan and I all kind of found each other through poetry, and so it's just really exciting to me that poetry is building this community and that we're all celebrating together. So thank you for being here. And when I was a child, my Irish heritage was really important to my family, and we talked about it a lot, but I had never been to Ireland until about 15 years ago. And we've traveled a lot, and I've landed lots of different places, and haven't ever had the feeling that I had the first time I landed in Ireland. As I was coming in over Dublin, I was just like, it was visceral, and I just felt like, I'm home. This is home. So this is called Trilogy, and it's a series of 3 linked poems about that. The first one is called Changeling. The sea churns green below, and there are sheep along the runway. I imagine changelings here as we skid to a stop. No words, just the odd sensation of home in this place I've never been. Home. In the place they left, driven out by famine, propelled by hope, their blood runs through me and recognizes home. Home. In the morning, I'll get up early, walk to the corner cafe, buy an Irish Times, order tea, and pretend to read the news, imagining this kind of life, imagining home. Home. You have the map of Ireland on your face, they said when I was growing up. I'll take you home again, Kathleen, my father sang. He sang Tura Lura Lura. That's an Irish lullaby. And then this is number 2, I'll take you home again, Kathleen. Walking the streets of Dublin, I see my grandfather everywhere. The shock of white hair and the prominent chin, the eyes that twinkle like a cliché. There he sits in Kennedy's and at the bus stop next to Oscar Wilde. He's the doorman in silk top hat and tails, opening the taxi door outside the Marian Arms. He's playing fiddle on the steps of St. Anne's. I am here in this place his father left, driven out by famine, the terrible hunger, propelled by hope, the great hunger. He came across the ocean, my grandfather's father, packed in steerage for a month with the dead and the dying, so that my grandfather could be born and sit in his house drinking tea, spooning marmalade, giving life to my father, who gave life to me, so that I could one day make a one-day voyage in business class, watching movies, sharing a 3-course meal, knowing nothing of sacrifice and suffering, still hungry, longing for home. Number 3, alone in the Dublin Writers' Museum. Outside, a steady rain pounds on leaded windows in haunted Parnell Square, awakening the ghosts of Behan, Beckett, Swift, and Wilde. I wander hallways in fading light, a specter moving slowly across splintered floors, opening doors that creak and moan, revealing rare and ancient manuscripts gathering dust in dusty rooms. A trove of leathered, weathered artifacts left open and untouched. Silenced voices, now released, whirl from floor to ceiling. Dracula and sweet Molly Malone, alive, alive, oh, once again. Swirling, rattling, crying out. The center cannot hold, just me and all these ghosts.
So how did writing those series of poems affect your connection? Because you had the experience that was powerful, but then you extended that experience by writing it down. So how did that change your relationship?
Well, it made me be back in the moment, and so every time I read these, actually, I'm back in the moment. The one where I'm talking about seeing all the people in the street that looked like my grandfather, and then every place that we went in Dublin, I would jot down different images there, and so it's like it never left me. It's become part of me.
One of my favorite all-time lines is that so I use the word cliche and make something totally new out of it. It's amazing. I guess because so much of it, that series dealt with kind of family, would you kind of get a sense of any kind of say like a therapeutic value out of writing, or being able to explore your family history through that? I don't know if therapeutic would be that's too much thinking.
Yeah, the last time we were there in Dublin, we went to the museum that is it tells the story of the people who came to America, and so there's a lot of just images there, and it really starts to just make you think about everything that people went through so that we could have this easy life. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
there's such a spirit of gratitude.
For sure.
She's very aware, and which made me, listening to it, makes me aware of my own position. Wow, pretty lucky guy.
We're very lucky. Very lucky.
Now I have the music of tour and Alive, Alive, oh, in my head.
Yes.
I'm cockles and muskets. I'm alive, oh. Sorry, choir teacher.
I learned it in 7th grade.
Yeah. We just sang it last year.
So I'm going to read another selection from Portraits of Red and Gray. This is a companion poem. You'll see why, but I won't quite say why. As we paused on the cables, we leave in darkness, guided by headlamp beams and the ch-ch-ch of boots on gravel. We hike for hours through waterfall mist, up stone-carved steps in forest depths, lit by hints of sunrise glow, past cottonwood and oak, until in time our muscles ache. Then breaking through the tree line's edge, lit brilliant as the shadows flee, switchbacks in stone go farther up, and in the distance, anchored firm, a pair of cables, two sleek lines appear on Half Dome's spine. We join the queue, anxious, unsure, then cling to steel and start to climb on cooled magma, slick as frost from winter's rain in years before. And then my calf begins to cramp. I pause for breath, suspended on a weathered plank. Your camelback just steps ahead. You turn and ask, "Are you okay?" And so I say, "We're almost there. We'll be okay. I can see the summit now." And then I'm holding you, only just born, cradled up, so perfect, slight. My teary eyes begin to blur, time disconnects. I won't let go, your sleeping breath so softly slows. That's from my older daughter, Emily. It started as a poem about Half Dome, and then I realized, well, I wrote this really nice poem about my younger daughter. So if you think of it as a grand plan in poetry, there usually isn't. That was like, oh, this would be a wonderful way to tie this back to my older daughter. And our trip up Half Dome ended up being her university letter, because she's deadly afraid of heights. And she definitely conquered it, or at least for that day. All right, now I'm going to read a pair of poems that I actually haven't, from my first book, Canvas. Oh, I should talk about the cover, because it's so cool. So a friend of mine is Carrie Byron from Mythbusters. She's known for that, but she's actually a very wonderful artist. She created this cover for the book. It uses a technique called black powder, where she paints it, protects part of it with clay, puts a tube on it, fills it up with gunpowder, sets it off, does that several times, and that's how you get this sort of this effect. So the actual painting, the actual painting's in my office. It's about that big. If you don't use enough gunpowder, it doesn't really do anything. And if you use too much, you got to start painting all over it because you destroy the work. So she said her neighbors really enjoy her. Okay, so these two, I haven't read these in public before. So this poem first appeared in Prompt for the Planet, which was a series of poems triggered by an Amanda Gorman poem, and then there was a call for poems about the natural environment, and so this one fit the bill. North, south, east, west. From the north, a pungent scent of vineyard fields, Cabernet blended with cherry plum currant and wisps from an unkempt campfire ember, or power line arc, or echoed boom of dry lightning. From the south, tendrils of brown reach into California's blue sky, flames racing through well-worn trails, chasing cougars into farmers' fields, sending suburbanites scurrying for filtered air. From the east, north and south now swirling into one, blazing vineyard fields and engulf redwoods, while Cal Fire air tankers soar into the torrent above a red line of trucks and their smoke-hardened fighters. From the west, brisk Pacific breeze nudges smoke into valleys, leaving a clear, cool, salt-scented wake. Barefoot toes drinking the tide and for a moment forgetting. And then it was still. Winds settle north, south, east, and west. Moon's rays refracted through the remnant smoke. Distant fires regroup, awaiting tomorrow. Windows long closed, now open a little. Then, one more. This I wrote a long time ago. Back in my days when I was hiding my poetic voice. Etchings. I start writing perched, waist deep on a Bahamian sandbar, tracing letters in azure blue surf. The letters momentary wisps on an endless swelling tide. Letters, words, trace back to shore. Rising tide chases sand-traced stanzas, leaving behind smeared blurs. Chasing the tide, I take my words away from waves encroach, writing more quickly, now more furious, challenging each crashing wave to catch my lettered trails. My poem continues from surf to sand clouds, chopped fine by turbopropped turns, tracing thoughts into cool vapor mist left floating in midair. My poem lies dormant now, chilled by mundane gray and skyline smog. I try to cut letters from the soot and smoke only to see them crumble like ash. Evelyn sees me, grabs my hand, cleaning away the dust and grime. Daddy, Daddy, follow me, I know where you can write. She leads me away from the concrete and steel to a small city park, a sandbox nestled in trees that lets sunlight through the blanket of gray. Daddy, try this. She hands me a freshly fallen branch. I write in the sand, circling around us until, entrapped, my daughter claps and twirls. The poem ends briskly at sunset when cold shivers come from the Pacific shore. Strolling lovers pause by the sand-etched stanzas as they are slowly whisked away by a moonlit winter breeze.
James, I don't really want to ask you a question. We talked about the beautiful sound in your poems and the images, but I just wanted to comment on the poem that you wrote for your daughter, or that you tacked on the end for your daughter. That's so effective because I think everybody can really relate to that, how you have a grown child and you're doing grown-up things with them, and then all of a sudden you're taken back to, the beginning, and it's such a powerful thing. So I'm glad that you tacked that on the end.
Yeah, no, it was a solution to a problem, which is, this poem's a cool poem about hiking Half Dome, but there's got to be 10 million of those. And I was thinking about Billy Collins again. It's such a wonderful poet. His poetry is so, he doesn't like people saying it's accessible, but it is. And yet it almost always has something that makes it more. And so I was really thinking of that. And then also I was definitely, I remember very vividly firstborn daughter, holding her in the hospital, totally just, this is incredible, totally in love with her. And so I thought about how powerful, and then on the going up Half Dome, the whole, myself and then the people around her really helping her get over the fear. It was pretty terrifying. And I just remember that both were very strong emotions in a different way, so they just felt like they naturally went together. Yeah.
So you kind of piggyback on that. So you get an idea for a poem, and like that poem, it starts maybe going in a different direction. How do you handle that kind of emotionally or artistically?
Yeah, I just go with it, kind of something like you said. But I will, some poems I can write fairly quickly. As a Poet Laureate, I won't get that much time to work on things. And other times I will just let it fester for a while and come back to it. And then if it needs to go in a totally different direction, then I learn not to get too attached to anything I write. So I wrote a poem which was turned into a piece of music and performed at the Presidio, which was really cool. And I looked at because I do all my poems now in Google Docs, I looked through the revision history over 6 months. And where it started and every edit is saved, it was radically different radically different. There were elements of it that were there, but another poem which I had written in a very formal, structured form, I ended up rewriting as a prose poem in the form of a screenplay because it just didn't work. The form was fighting it. So I think it's very important as a writer that you are willing to throw stuff out and start over because you almost always end up with something better.
Frank O'Hara has that poem, Why I Am Not a Painter. Talks about his painter friend starting with sardines. And the painting is titled Sardines, but at the end of the poem there's no sardines in the poem. And he starts writing a poem about oranges, and then there's no mention of oranges.
Yes.
One of my favorite Billy Collins is, but Mom, I made you a lanyard.
Oh,
Yes.
If anybody wants to laugh as a mom, but that lanyard poem.
That is the best.
But Mom, I made you a lanyard. You gave life to me, but here's your lanyard from camp.
Any closing questions?
I have a closing question for all three of you. Do you remember back to your first poem? You were referencing it, James, I think. And what triggered your writing it? And did that experience create for you the sense that you were a poetry writer?
Oh, so our very, very first poem way back? Boy, my first poem was written in 10th grade when I took a creative writing class. And then the teacher who I was able to track, I tracked down all my teachers that are still alive and sent them signed copies of my book up in Canada. That was some work tracking them all down. But
they're thrilled.
oh
my gosh.
yeah, they sent me very nice notes and they all read it. It was beautiful. I'm sure they were like, tears were expected, and I'm sure they occurred. So yeah, so the very, very first poem, I don't know, I kept all the poems from 10th grade, 4 of which I actually put in the book, in the appendix, that stood the test of time. I don't know which the very first poem was, but I do remember when I got interested in poetry, and it was when that teacher introduced us to E. Cummings and more modern poetry, and we weren't getting just, the classics are helpful and useful. However, they're not extremely relatable to a high school student. So that was really the spark, and then that class just gave the freedom to experiment, and that was the spark. If I hadn't taken that class, I always enjoyed writing. I doubt I would have. Maybe I would have still become a poet, but I don't know if I would have. So teachers are very important. Great teachers.
She was my
Do you remember your first poem?
Yeah, there was a girl named Laura Featherstone in 7th grade. I really liked her. And it was a way to try to express myself and impress her. I don't think I had the courage to show it to her, but it helped me kind of get. But that was definitely the first poem that I remember writing was because of a crush.
The first poem I wrote that I remember was in 6th grade, and I have a copy of it somewhere, and my handwriting was so flowery. It was ridiculous. And the poem was called The Butterfly, and it was basically about a butterfly landed on my nose, and then it flew away, and the last line, which I thought was like the most beautiful line ever, was, I wept.
You and Jesus, yeah.
Any other questions? I wept, although that's a very appropriate last line. So,
I do have
one
last
yes,
question.
Absolutely.
Talking about teachers, do you present in classrooms, and how can you do for for children what has been done for you? Inspiring.
So I really want to as Poet Laureate of Dublin. However, last year the school system was in such recovery mode, even though they're back in class, that it was just outside visit was impossible. So hoping to get in there this year, school year. I think that in what I already know what I want to do an exercise in is this that writing poetry unlocks memories. I mean, I wrote this half my book on this trip to Russia 5 years after I went there. When I wrote it as a university senior year term project, and it was the more I wrote, the more I remembered, the more I wrote, the more I remembered, and it was amazing, like how much detail I remembered. Writing poetry forces you to really immerse in images and sounds and feelings and textures, and then it just unlocks. It's like a magic wand that unlocks. So that's what I would like to do an exercise with high school students, is to get them to write about something they're passionate about, and they'll see it just.
I teach freshmen composition at DVC. So what I do, instead of the third essay, I completely switched the last 5 weeks to creative writing, and I'm able to fulfill the requirements through that. So I love it. It's really neat, and they're so kind of, I don't know, it's just really interesting to get 18 or 19-year-olds kind of, this is really neat to read their stuff. And, so if anybody wants to mentor, DVC does have a mentorship program, and they're always looking for mentors.
Yeah, and I taught in the district for a long time, and so I still get invited into classrooms to run workshops, which I love, and I do some children's writing workshops online, and for me, it's like a drug. I just feel like every time I go in and I work with a group of kids, I feel high. It's just the most amazing thing. And to watch kids especially who think that they have nothing to say, and then they come up and they show you what they had to say, it's just a really powerful thing to be able to do. So yeah, if anybody wants somebody to come visit, I'm always willing and happy to do that.
Well, and on that note, your book, your latest book, Alpha Poetica, I've been sharing it with young people in my shop, and it's so inspiring for from all different ages, and especially those that don't think they could write a poem. There's so many delightful little prompts. It's a good cross-generation share. Thank you.
She has a magic.
Yeah.
Well, I can only speak from personal experience because my oldest son was in her 8th grade English class, and he came into it thinking he just didn't write or couldn't write, and hasn't stopped since. But I can use the words, I wept when you left the classroom. We did. We were like, no! But, you know, the exuberance, and you give me that same feeling for those freshmen, but the exuberance, and you just can't not like to write around it. You just want to write. I'm like, I'll go home and try my pittance, but I can sing it, but I can't.
I'll tell you, that's one of my greatest joys, is that you can have a really introverted or shy student. They can just be like a lion or whatever they want to be on the page, and it's such a really cool thing where you're like, whoa, you're super assertive.
Well, thank you, everybody. This has been delightful.
We, of course, have our books for sale through Rakestraw Books, and we'll sign them for anyone who is interested. So thank you very much for coming out.
Yeah.